Hi everyone, welcome to the Ashley Barlow Company podcast. I'm Ashley Barlow, your host. If you are a parent, a teacher, or someone who works at a school, or you're a community member, a volunteer, or a staff member at an organization that supports people with special education plans, a coach, a tutor, or even a grandparent, you're in the right place. Sit back with an ice cold glass of lemonade, put on your walking shoes and grab some headphones, roll down the windows and cruise. Ready, set, go. Educate, advocate, collaborate. Welcome back to another episode of Special Education Advocacy with Ashley Barlow. I'm Ashley Barlow, and I'm so happy you're here. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite books. It's called The Behavior Code. The authors are Jessica Minahan and Nancy Rappaport, who is a physician. Jessica Minahan is spelled Minahan, and Nancy Rappaport is spelled Rappaport. I will put a link to this book both online as well as in the show notes if you would like a specific link. If you're watching on YouTube, this is what my particular book looks like. I think there are a couple other covers as it's been published and republished, etc. But I totally love this book, and I want to talk to you about it. I've got some notes on some specific, kind of overviews of the chapter that I'm going to share with you. And what I love the most about this book, honestly, is literally in the first 26 pages, you get the information that you can share with your school if they don't know how to address behavior at all. And I'm talking problematic behavior, but I'm also talking a lot about just kind of generalized human behavior. Children that withdraw, children that have sexualized behavior, children that present with a lot of anxiety. If your child has just kind of pervasive behaviors, negative behaviors, and or just human behavior, this book will likely help you immensely. And the thing that I think it helps the most with is being able to explain what to do about behaviors in actual words, because you know it, you live it. But the hardest thing for me is being able to explain what we do and why we do it in words. And when I read about it, I'm like, yes, that's what the doctor said. That's what the behaviorist said. That's what the psychologist or the social worker or the OT or my next door neighbor, that's what they said. Here are the words. So before we dive into this book, I want to tell you, we are appropriately located in my home office where I just have stacks and stacks and stacks of books on behavior. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about first, is using books. So I teach my children with books. When my kids were little, if they were going to the dentist for the first time, if they were playing soccer for the first time, they were both terrible at soccer, by the way. If they were, when Griffin was getting a baby, all of those things, he was getting a baby brother, rather. I taught them with books. So there's books on potty training. There's books on how to play soccer and what soccer looks like. There's books on what happens when you get a baby sibling or when you get a dog. I still teach my kids with books. And the reason why is because I teach myself with books. So I'll never forget one time I was reading. I've been a fan of Kelly Hampton's for quite some time, since Jack was an infant. Kelly is located she's a blogger, and she's got really great stuff on social media, particularly to support the Down syndrome community over at Enjoying the Small Things. The social media handle is ETST. And I remember early on in her children's lives, she's a parent of a child with Down syndrome. She talked about how her older daughter was chucking a book across the room. And she looked at it, and it happened to be a book that was Understanding Down Syndrome in Children, or Speech Skills in Children with Down Syndrome. And she was like, it turns out I've never actually opened the book, but there are, in fact, days that I feel like chucking that book across the room too. And I thought that was so apropos, that a toddler would chuck a book about Down syndrome in the direction of their sibling that had Down syndrome. And then later, or maybe it was earlier, sometime, she posted about the books and said, truth be told, I haven't really opened a ton of the books, but having the books on my bookshelf makes me feel like a better parent. And I think sometimes that is it. The more information that we are surrounded with, the more comforted we feel because we know the information is there if we need it. We know we've got it, and if we're having a crisis at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night, we can open the books. So what I tell my clients when I recommend books, I used to have to do this in divorce all the time, and it really helped me to prepare with clients that were experiencing behavior issues with their kids in particular, or, kind of concerning psychological things, is if I've got a repair that I need to do on my house, I will at first open a book. We literally have a book that talks about, what to do with a leaky faucet and how to replace that fluid master on your toilet and how to replace a door or a car battery or any of those things that are kind of like household adulting kind of repairs. And yes, Mr. Barlow, Brandon needs that kind of a thing. And really, probably 6 times out of 10, the book is sufficient. Nowadays, we YouTube that, like how to blah, blah, blah. And then if we can't, then we need an expert. But I'm not going to spend my money and my time and my energy on an expert if it's something that I can DIY and something that I can learn about. So I'm a big fan of books. And I'm here to tell you that there are 1.5 billion really great books that will help to support your child with problematic and everyday behaviors that are impacting their school experience negatively or anything better than positively. And so I want to talk to you about the behavior code. That's kind of my endorsement for books. And I did want to say one more thing before we go on. So this, I think, is my first real significant book review type thing. And this isn't necessarily a book review. I recommend the book. So that is the book review. I can get more involved in nitty gritty in books. I can get less involved in the nitty gritty of books. But what I would love to know is, are you enjoying my kind of take on books? Like, is it helpful for me to share about books with you? Because I have 1.5 billion books on behavior that I've read. I have 1.5 billion books on reading that I've read. I have tons of negotiation books that I've read, like more than 1 billion. What's next? Trillion. And I would be happy to put these into PDFs and even give you links if that would be helpful. So, it's kind of hard on a podcast because it actually takes you deliberately going to social media or to email to contact me, but shoot me a DM or an email and let me know if you would like for me to share more about books. And if so, tell me what you want. Do you want me to give you quotes and really kind of sell the book to you? Or do you just want for me to tell you what might be in a book so that you know whether or not the book is going to be right for you? Up to you, but I would love to hear from you. Okay, so the behavior code. I have given you the names of the authors. And what I love about this book, as I said, is literally in chapter 1, you get information in the first 26 pages that really is kind of like the behavior 101 that I give to schools when I can tell that a child is really struggling. Now, what I will tell you, and actually chapter 1 doesn't start until page 7, so in 20 pages, you can learn a ton about behavior. So here's the deal is, so often you are getting those messages from school, whether it's emails or it's phone calls or it's text messages or it's notes on that smiley face, frowny face thing that comes home, or the planner that comes home. That's basically it was a sucky day, and you as the parent are like, well, first of all, what do you want for me to do about it? And second of all, what did you do? And third of all, did he do anything good at school? Do you even like her? And, all of these things. And you're like, well, you're just reporting all this negative stuff back to me. And I can't help. How can I feel like a member of the IEP team if all I'm getting is this negativity? It is incredibly frustrating. And a lot of times parents' first reaction is to be like, I don't want to hear about it. Send me notes about what you're doing in school. Send me notes about social things. Send me notes about grades, etc. But I don't want to hear that they broke a pencil, that they ate a pencil, that they pulled somebody's hair out, that they cleared a bookshelf, that they called the principal, in Jack Barlow's case, a dumbass. I don't care. That's 2 cuss words. I better stop. We're only 9 minutes in. That could be bad. I don't care about those things. But then what happens is you get no communication. And then the school's like, well, she didn't want to hear about bad behaviors. And so you kind of get in this weird cycle of less and less communication, and then you don't feel like you are a valued person on the IEP team because you don't feel like they care. And in fact, you have spent countless hours reading and supporting and going to therapies and going to doctor's appointments and checking medication and like beating yourself into the ground by learning about your child's behaviors, but you can't communicate with school about it. So it is my opinion that getting super duper involved and informed by reading will help you to help your child because you can advocate in school. And if you can get yourself super informed on behavior, then you can equally and meaningfully participate in IEP meetings because you can be like, ho, I am the expert on, in my case, Jack Barlow's behavior at school. Fill in your child's name. I am the expert. I can help you help my child at school. Voila. I am your Glinda the Good Witch because I have read books like The Behavior Code. Okay, so what does chapter 1 of we're just going to go chapter by chapter, and I'm going to give you kind of like some of my favorites. I just have little page numbers written here for myself, and I've highlighted. I've written all over this book, and I folded things, and I had to take my tabs out so that I didn't confuse myself when I gave you this update. So in chapter 1, I'm not going to give you page numbers because your edition might be differently, but one of the things that you get is you get essential concepts for understanding behavior. Like literally, how do we understand behavior? And why is it important to even study behavior? Why is it a special factor on the IEP form? Like, why does the federal government say that we need to address behavior? And so you get these 6 bullet points. Number 1, misbehavior is a symptom of an underlying cause. Behavior happens for a reason. It is a symptom of an underlying cause. Number 2, behavior is communication. Holy cow. Yes, how many times do we have to say that? But what do we do with that fact? Number 3, it has a function. And we know about those 4 functions. Those are also contained in chapter 1. Behavior occurs in patterns. That's number 4. Yes, it occurs in patterns. And because it occurs in patterns, we can actually do something with it, that we can do something with that ABC data. Number 5, the only behavior that teachers can control is their own. You cannot control somebody else's behavior, but you can implement strategies so that you can support it, so that you can help to change it. And number 6, behavior can be changed. So we have these 6 key concepts. And then the rest of this chapter takes each of those 6 key concepts and goes into it. And when we talk about how behavior can be changed, then we start to understand what that ABC data might look like, how we're going to start to evaluate behaviors. So in chapter 1, we really start to understand those 6 concepts. And if those 6 concepts are new and novel to you, then holy cow, dive into this chapter. If they are not new and novel to you, but you would have a hard time right now summarizing each of those 6 concepts into 3 sentences, can you tell everybody everything they need to know to say you can change behavior? You can't control behavior, but you can change behavior. Can you say 3 sentences that can summarize that? If the answer is no, read this chapter, and after you read it, you will be able to, I promise. And that way, in a meeting, you can say, well, have we done blah, 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 and you can be effective because you can now communicate about behavior. Here's a parallel. Griffin is a swimmer, and he would like to swim in college. And, part of recruiting in college and really any place in the workplace, etc., is being able to sell yourself, right? And so Griffin knows what his strengths are. We talk about strengths a lot, as you can imagine. It's something that I talk a lot about here, and it's something that we talk a lot about. But I actually have him read personal development books like growth mindset and that kind of thing. I think I've told you about the one, I'm going to cuss again, beep, that is called Don't Be an Asshole. It's a great book. So we read those books so that he knows how to talk the talk. He knows how to efficiently say, oh, here are my strengths. here is something that I'm good at, in a way that's graceful. So the more you read about it, the more you can become introspective, and then therefore be the opposite of introspective. What is it? Outrospective? That must be a word that I lost in COVID. I definitely have COVID brain. The more you can talk about it and sell yourself in the workplace, and in his case to college coaches and recruiters. So if you're reading about behavior, and if you're really starting to kind of like talk the talk, then you can walk the walk in IEP meetings. So that's behavior. And certainly if you're a teacher or an advocate, the same thing applies to you, because really a lot of this is communication. Okay, chapter 2 talks about the FAIR plan. Now, FAIR is an acronym that this book utilizes. And really what they are talking about is 5 steps to developing a behavior intervention plan, a behavior support system. And so the 5 steps kind of use those foundational concepts from chapter 1 to build on this FAIR plan. So the FAIR plan is 5 steps. Number 1, you're going to manage the antecedents, those A's in the ABC data. And you're going to manage those with accommodations and modifications that kind of affect the outcome for the student. And then number 2, you're going to reinforce desired behaviors. You're going to actually teach replacement behaviors. Teach, like, if Jack's calling the principal a bad word, then teach appropriate greetings for the principal. Like, hey, when you see Dr. So-and-so going into the building, you could say, good morning, Dr. So-and-so, or hello, Dr. So-and-so, or how was your day, Dr. So-and-so? Or even if you're in a bad mood, how about if you say, I'm not feeling it today, bad mood, all of that is more polite than DUMBASS. And so we're teaching those replacement behaviors. Number 4, and that's so odd. That is so foreign to so many people. Jack, for example, has social anxiety, and so he does say that word quite a bit. That's like one of his words. I think he knows it gets a rise out of people, and that's better than, hey, I don't want to talk to you, I'm not feeling very well right now. And Jack is never, ever, ever going to say, hey, I don't want to talk to you, I'm not feeling very well right now. It makes me anxious to talk to you. Largely because he can't identify that anxiety himself yet. And so what do we tell him? He uses a talker, and he has a button on his talker that says something to the extent of, I'm having a hard time coming up with words, and so I don't want to talk to you right now. It was literally pre-programmed into his touch chat, and I was like, that is perfect. Is it rude? Absolutely. If somebody without a behavior diagnosis said that to me, I'd be like, okay, I'm not going to try talking to you again. But is it less rude than go home cuss word? Absolutely. And so we're working through those things, okay? So we're teaching replacement behaviors. Number 4, address an underdeveloped skill that are the root of the inability to behave appropriately. So if the antecedent is an inability to transition or a really struggle with reading or something like that, then we have to address those insufficiencies. And then 5, we have to respond to a student's inappropriate behaviors in a way that deters it. And that is far more complicated than just that. We have to give very consistent and expected consequences to behaviors when they do happen. So this chapter goes through those 5 steps and explains to us how you build a plan that is appropriate for the child. How do we get this FAIR plan implemented? Then, what the book does after we go through chapters 1 and 2, and by the way, if all you need is how you address behavior in school, why you address it, what behavior is, what the key concepts to behavior are, and then how to do a BIP, you can get that in this book in 42 pages. The end of chapter 2 on my desk right here in this version is page 42. So in 42 pages, I promise you that you can read that in an hour. It is good. It is like talking the language. So only 42 pages, and you get like Behavior 101 and then how to address Behavior 101. Fantastic. The next chapters, 3, 4, 5, and 6, address children with specific kind of personality profiles or human behavior profiles and how to address them. So we go through anxiety, oppositional behavior, withdrawal, and sexualized behavior. And for each of those, we learn a little bit about children with profiles that mirror those kinds of behavioral conditions. And then we also go through strategies and ways to provoke empathy and, things that will support both the teacher and the child. So chapter 3 talks about children that present with a lot of anxiety. The chapter is literally called Get Away From Me, the student with anxiety-related behavior. And the reason why I decided to give you this is because I remembered that this book had this chapter. Jack's anxiety is pretty pervasive right now, and it's impacting his schooling actually less significantly than I thought, but I'm still kind of looking for things. And Jack literally says, go home, girl, which is essentially the same as get away from me. And so I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what he says. That's funny, because it was kind of hard for me to figure out that it was anxiety for a while. So what's this chapter focus on? Like, what are some kind of key concepts in this chapter? So one of the things that it talks about is how hard anxiety is to identify as kind of the source of a behavior. There are, for anxiety, it's really hard because anxiety doesn't present itself outwardly very easily and also very consistently. And so you really kind of have to be looking for it. And so if you think your child could be anxious and that could be affecting their behavior, really kind of reading through this and maybe even reading it a couple of times to be like, could it be, might be helpful for you. In addition to that, the behavior patterns can be inconsistent. If your child is like doing one thing the next day and then another thing the next day, it's like, well, how do I teach replacement behaviors? Because there are so many different behaviors. But maybe the source is actually addressing the anxiety and providing some support so that we are addressing that. And that way we aren't getting these really inconsistent results and inconsistent behaviors. Anxiety happens a lot with escape. So if you've got a child that's escaping, this might be a good chapter for you to read. Another key that the book talks about with anxiety is it's super duper important to give children with anxiety non-contingent anxiety reducing breaks. So non-contingent means that it can't be based on something else. If you do this worksheet well, then you get to go do bubbles. If you do this worksheet well, you can go listen to your music and calm down a little bit, or you can go chill in here. That doesn't work, obviously. We have to do it non-consistently and preferably preemptively before we know of something that's going to produce a lot of anxiety. And also, kids with anxiety really tend to struggle with transition, and so we might need to have some really specific plans around transition. So chapter 3 kind of summarizes what anxiety would look like and then what some strategies are to help a child to kind of manage their anxiety at school. Another thing that I don't have in this list that I highlighted, but that I think is really important with anxiety, is that we'll go through waves of anxiety. So, a lot of people will have like 4 or 5 days where they're just really anxious and they don't know why. I have anxiety too, and I have post-traumatic stress disorder, which I've shared with you. And I will tell you that, I'll have a panic attack one day for like a very known reason. And then for like 6 or 8 days after that, I might have a panic attack every day and be like, what the heck? I'm not the slightest bit upset. And I meditate and I've done yoga and I've gone running and I took a day off and I took those 3 hours to read my book in the lounge chair and not care about anything. Why in the heck am I having a panic attack? My resting heart rate's at 50. Why am I having a panic attack? And then that's almost anxiety producing itself. And so if you read this, all of a sudden you get empathy for people that have anxiety. And if you're a parent and your child has anxiety and you're trying to communicate about anxiety to school and you read this chapter, then you can communicate about your child's anxiety in a way that provokes empathy for that school team. And so that's why I recommend reading books. Again, I'm going to keep beating that horse until it is dead, although we don't want to kill horses. I'm a Kentuckian. Okay, chapter 4. ODD, children that present with oppositional behaviors. The chapter is called You're Not the Boss of Me. So what does this chapter what are some key concepts from this chapter? A big key to working with children that present with oppositional behavior is building relationships with the child. And man, you are saying, yeah, But you know what they say about my kid? They say that my kid's just bad, and they have no desire to interact with my kid. I can tell they hate my kid. And so how do we build relationships? This chapter does a really great job at talking about how to build relationships, how to get them to care so that they can build relationships with your child, because you can't do it. You can't facilitate the relationship between the teacher and the child as the parent. And so how do we build relationships? How do we provoke that, the empathy that's kind of primary to that relationship building? And then in addition to that, when we're identifying kids with oppositional behavior, what are we looking for? We're looking for cognitive inflexibility. There's kids that are just like, nope, I'm right. Or this is a fact. And you're like, huh? That is not, where's your sense of reality or your sense of justice? That kind of like all or nothing thinking is really common with kids with oppositional presentations. Difficulty with authority, which your host has. I definitely challenge authority quite a bit. Social problems with peers. This is all kind of oppositional behavior. So if your child is struggling with those things, then that might be something that you want to look at in a chapter that you want to read. And of course, if we have oppositional behaviors, the behaviors will seem to escalate. And so a lot of times schools will say, well, this didn't really seem like a big deal in the beginning. And now all of a sudden it's like, where'd this come from? Well, I always have to point out to them that that's like part of the profile of a child that's oppositional. Like, it's gonna build. You're gonna go up this escalator. And if you look back at the disciplinary stuff or the communication from the teacher, you're gonna see that it started off as just like getting a little attention. And then it went to bugging peers. And then it went to like really getting mad at gym class. And then before you knew it, he's, giving somebody a bloody nose in the hallway. And so this chapter talks about struggles that children with this kind of presentation often experience. Like, one thing is demands, because they challenge authority, and then strategies that can be helpful for children with oppositional behaviors. So that is chapter 4. Then we've got 2 more kind of presentations. We've got withdrawal and sexualization. Another reason I thought this book was super helpful to talk about right now is because I know that a lot of children are kind of withdrawing, and I've read a lot about how that might be secondary to the different social environment that we all sustained during the COVID-19 pandemic, when a lot of us were learning from home and teaching our kids from home. And so what does withdrawal look like? How do we support kids that are withdrawing? And, how do we communicate about withdrawing behaviors to school? So this chapter is called I Don't Care. And what we're looking at is we're looking at children that are, kind of apathetic or completely unengaged. The hood up, the head on the desk, lots of time in their room, the AirPod in all the time, and the kind of like lack of interest, like well, I don't really care. Apathy. Now, I will tell you that this one's kind of hard to pick out in teenagers because, it's like a thing for teenagers to withdraw. And sometimes they're doing it deliberately and they aren't actually withdrawing. They're just like pretending to withdraw because they think it's cool and they just can't even with us. Oh, I heard a joke about can't even. I'm really bad at telling you jokes, but here's an interlude, an unplanned interlude. Why do kids hang out in odd numbers? That's not it. It's like, oh man, I'm gonna be so bad at telling you the joke, and now I've like done it for you. I've started it. Why do kids go to the bathroom in groups of 3 or something like that? And the punchline is because they can't even. I still think it's funny, even though I can't remember the question. Look it up and tell people that joke. Now I'm going to get messages about how I'm bad at telling jokes. This is like, this is a thing. Okay, sorry, bad one. We're not editing it out because that's part of the shtick around here. Okay, so what is, this kind of withdrawn behavior? Sometimes it'll start off as like a negative, almost like an attention-seeking behavior. You might get kids that avoid positive attention. And, like I said, it's kids that are just trying to kind of like avoid any kind of interaction with anybody. It is oftentimes, if it is an actual issue, more common for kids with depression. how do we support these children? A lot of it is with empathy and with relation. And so, of course, we have to be on alert for children with really dangerous behaviors and presentations, children with suicidal thoughts, etc. But really kind of how do we empathize with these children, and how do we kind of bring them to a more engaged presentation? And so, this chapter talks about kids that feel misperceived socially and kids that want any kind of attention and why that might be, and kind of getting to the root cause of that. So now, one thing that I haven't mentioned before is, as we're going through these different chapters, they all kind of end with a FAIR plan, that behavior support plan, to address these kinds of things. And so they will walk you through what the antecedents and the consequences for specific behaviors look like, and even ideas for specific measurable things for kids with these different kind of personality traits, or things that are looking kind of outward in their personalities. Okay, chapter 6, and then we'll move on to chapter 7, which is FAQs. And I'm going to do it kind of quickly because this episode's getting kind of long. So chapter 6 is students with sexualized behaviors. And so, first of all, it's important to know that some sexualized behaviors are appropriate and some are inappropriate. So some are developmentally appropriate. So there are normal sexual behaviors that, children will experience. And so it really kind of talks about what to look for that is not normal. And so we've got a definition of what those behaviors look like and what to look at. And then it talks about causes. What could be causing sexualized behavior? It might be anxiety, like a self-soothing thing. It might be a need for attention. It might be imitation. And then, of course, there's all kinds of problematic, scary things to look for. And particularly teachers, but also coaches and parents and other people oftentimes have duties to report some of that scary behavior. And so it goes through those as well. But oftentimes children that experience this kind of behavior are having some kind of deficit with their interpersonal skills, are having trouble with impulsiveness, or trauma. And so it helps you to identify those things and to really talk about them with school. I think this one is an important chapter to read, by the way, because talking about sexualized behaviors can be difficult because it's not something that we talk about often. It's taboo in America for one reason or another. That's cultural here. And so if you're reading about it, it will help you come up with language that makes you feel more comfortable, particularly if you are uncomfortable talking about these behaviors. But really kind of the idea is teaching the school staff how to understand the behaviors and then how to minimize the triggers, and then teaching, of course, appropriate behaviors as a result. And then there's a big thing in here about trauma sensitive behavior reinforcement. And, that's super important, particularly if you don't feel like your school is utilizing trauma sensitive strategies. Okay, and then chapter 7 has some FAQs. So I've highlighted a couple that I just want to go through with you because I think they're super helpful. Mine is totally written up on all of them because I think it is very helpful. But number 4 talks about how does a teacher talk to other students after a student's explosive incident. I think this is super helpful to being empathetic and respectful to the child and, kind of separating out the behavior and the human. Number 5 talks about family involvement and how to communicate about behaviors. And that might help you to explain, if you're a parent, how to explain how you want to be communicated with and how you want to participate in the communication, etc. Number 6 talks about, what happens if a student's behavior injures somebody else and how you talk to the parents about that. And then, number 12 talks about, the question is there hope for these students? And of course, the overarching answer is yes. And it really kind of talks about separating out the child and the behavior and finding a way to empathize and keeping the child at the center as opposed to the behavior. So I really, really, really love this book, The Behavior Code. I'm curious to see if you like it as well. I'll put a link up on social media. There's a link in our show notes. I would love to hear from you on whether or not you would like for me to go through additional books from time to time. And I will see you next week, same time, same place.